I'm the biblical translator. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, depending on which part of the world you are watching this video from. Welcome to Food of the Heart, where together we prepare another meal for the part of us that often gets neglected. Today's meal is called Spiritualising Disrespect. There are some things we can survive once or twice, but when they become normalised, they slowly change how we see ourselves. One of those things is disrespect, especially when someone wraps it up in spiritual language and tells us it is something we should simply accept. Sometimes people don't say, "I'm treating you badly." Instead, they say, "God is teaching you patience," or "You need to humble yourself," or "You have to forgive." Before long, we begin wondering whether standing up for ourselves sometimes means we are failing God. That creates a very hungry heart because every human being has a need to be treated with dignity. We all need to know that our feelings matter, that our voice matters, and that being kind does not mean becoming invisible. The difficulty is that many good-hearted people have been taught to confuse endurance with holiness. They think that the more disrespect they tolerate, the more spiritual they become. But I don't believe God ever intended us to mistake abuse for obedience. It's a bit like when you're trying to untangle the charging cable from your phone and somehow it's managed to tie itself into a knot while sitting completely untouched on the bedside table. You stand there looking at it, wondering how something that wasn't moving managed to become so complicated. Human relationships can become like that too. Over time, unhealthy ideas quietly wrap themselves around good beliefs until we can't remember which strand belongs to truth and which belongs to fear. Then someone says a good Christian would never challenge anyone, and another knot appears. The truth is, Jesus was full of compassion, but he was never intimidated by manipulation. He loved deeply, yet he also said no. He walked away from crowds. He corrected people. He overturned tables when God's house was being dishonored. Love did not make him weak. Love made him truthful. I sometimes think we forget that. Somewhere along the way, many people came to believe that being peaceful means never confronting anything. But peace and silence are not the same thing. Sometimes silence protects wisdom. Other times, silence protects dysfunction. Knowing the difference is part of growing. One scripture that comes to mind is where Jesus says, "Love your neighbour as yourself." We usually focus on loving our neighbour, and rightly so, but those last two words matter as much as the other. If I continually accept treatment that I would be heartbroken to see somebody else endure, then perhaps I've misunderstood something about love altogether. Real love has room for self-respect as well as compassion. Have you ever apologized to a piece of furniture after walking into it? You bang your shin on the corner of a coffee table, you rub your leg in pain, and somehow the first word out of your mouth is, "Sorry." Then you stop and think, "I apologized to a table." Because we've done something like that. But sometimes we apologize in relationships just as automatically. We say sorry to keep the peace, sorry because someone looks disappointed, sorry because we're uncomfortable with tension. And after a while, we don't even ask ourselves whether we've actually done anything wrong. We become experts at carrying responsibility that doesn't belong to us. That is another form of hunger. The heart needs fairness, it needs truth, it needs to know where responsibility begins and where it ends. Spiritualizing disrespect often sounds very noble. Just keep praying, just keep serving, just keep submitting. Prayer is wonderful, service is beautiful, humility is precious. But none of those were ever designed to become excuses for another person's bad behaviour. We should never use the Bible as sticking plaster over wounds that really need honesty. God heals wounds. He doesn't ask us to pretend they aren't there. Sometimes I think of the woman who had suffered for 12 years before she reached out and touched Jesus' garment. Jesus didn't tell her to go away and simply suffer quietly for another 12 years because endurance was making her holy. He acknowledged her. He saw her. He restored her dignity publicly. That's important because disrespect steals dignity long before it steals confidence. Once dignity begins to return, confidence usually follows behind. There's another everyday moment that always makes me smile. You walk confidently towards a door in the supermarket, expecting it to slide open automatically, only to discover you've chosen the one that switches off. Suddenly you're standing there, waving your hands, stepping forward and backwards as if you're trying to negotiate with the door, hoping nobody noticed. Sometimes we spend years doing something very similar in relationships. We keep trying the same approach, hoping this time respect will appear automatically. We smile more, we explain more, we become more patient. We become more understanding, yet the door never opens because respect cannot be forced by trying harder. It has to be freely given. That realization can feel painful at first, but it can also be wonderfully freeing because it allows us to stop exhausting ourselves trying to earn what healthy people offer naturally. I know some people listening today have spent years believing that saying no makes them selfish. Others feel guilty every time they create a boundary because somebody immediately accuses them of being unloving. But boundaries are not walls to keep people out. Healthy boundaries are doors they can open and close. They simply help us decide what is welcome and what is not. Even God gave humanity boundaries in the Garden of Eden. Boundaries have existed since the beginning of creation. They are not evidence of a lack of love. They are evidence that love has structure. The heart also needs permission to trust its own observations. If something consistently leaves you feeling diminished, fearful or confused, don't ignore that simply because someone quotes a scripture while doing it. Truth never becomes more truthful because it is spoken with a Bible verse attached. The fruit still matters. Jesus said, we would know people by their fruits, not by how spiritual they sound, not by how loudly they prayed, not by how many verses they could quote, by their fruits. Does their presence produce peace, kindness, gentleness and respect? Or does it produce fear, shame and constant self-doubt? That question often tells us more than 100 arguments ever could. If today's meal has reached your heart, perhaps the nourishment you need was not more guilt, but more clarity. Perhaps you needed permission to remember that God values you too. You were never created to become smaller, so someone else's ego could become larger. You were never called to confuse disrespect with discipleship. Kindness and wisdom belong together. Grace and truth walk hand in hand. And maybe today your heart can rest in the quiet confidence that honouring God does not require dishonouring yourself. And I hope this food for your heart has landed with somebody somewhere and has made you feel and recognise that some people, even though they come over as spiritual, they're not necessarily the right people. Remember the sheep in wolves' clothing and the way the Bible warns us about those people who will say God, 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 but he will say, I do not know you. So all you have is your spirit of discernment to protect you. So take care of yourself, take care of each other. Until your next meal, I am going to say goodbye for now, the biblical translator, and I'll speak to you again sometime soon. I hope you enjoyed.